Okay, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Fernando. We really appreciate it. You said you've done a few of these before, and they've always been fun. How many book clubs have you participated in?
I don't count them. I take them as they go, and I
Yeah.
always have a good time. I always feel that I learn something too.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. I'm gonna use the microphone so people can hear us out here with our questions. Yes, we've just been an hour talking about the book,
Oh my
and
goodness.
yes, and it's been very. I think we've all learned things from each other. Wouldn't you guys say? We have about 25 people here. I'll show you at the end. You can get a look at the crowd. So we're excited to hear more from your. We dive in to your brain a little bit. And then also, I was going to say, so this is a book and dinner club. So I was going to let you know what we've been having for dinner. I will say, this is my bad, you guys. Tamales did not make it because I was taking so long to read the book that I didn't get the kitchen. The tamales come in late in the game, and they take them.
Having made tamales
They take
before in my life, I think that Kaman is probably happy.
Baby, yeah, they're pretty labor intensive, I think. So what we've had so far is muhammara and whipped ricotta, roasted adobo chicken, and then for dessert we're having sukshe. I think that so I mentioned that one of the characters is Syrian, or Syrian descent. So I think there's some Syrian food mixed in with the Texan and Mexican food. So
Fantastic. I would love a picture of that or like a list of it. If that's
yeah, we'll take a picture and I can email it to you at the end.
super cool.
Yeah. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to ask to jump off in is, can you give us a little background of like where the story came from, or if there was like a scene or a specific character that came to you first, or like how did we get from your brain to the written page?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you all for having me and for spending time with this book and thinking about it and discussing it and stuff. I really appreciate it. Let me think. Okay, so I realized recently that I started writing this book almost exactly 10 years ago. Oh my God, is that true? Yeah, and almost 10 years ago to the day on April 2015. And I write everything on my typewriter on an Oliveri Underwood Letter 32. So at the time, my first novel, Tears of the Truffle Pig, I had finished it and I was transcribing the entire thing into the computer. And I was sort of going crazy because I realized it would take me like a week to do and then 20 pages of the novel.
Yeah.
So it took me so long. So I was like, I need to get away from this. And also that novel dealt with a very male kind of world. And I really needed to get away from it. I felt that I was going crazy. Uh, so one day I was sitting somewhere, all right, and then the song "Judy Is a Punk" by the Ramones started playing, and I was like, "What if this song was a novel?" You know, it tells you two characters. Jackie is a punk, Judy is a runt. I was like, okay, I know these people. I feel like I've partied with these people before.
All right. All right.
So, and also I was thinking a lot about 19th century kind of narratives because at the time also, my wife had called me out on never having read books by women written in the 19th century. For example, Middlemarch
Okay.
or the Bronte sisters, who I had never read. So when I was transcribing this book, I immediately started reading all these books, Middlemarch, Bronte sisters, and I started writing this narrative. Also, I had this idea, this vision of this person in the future, this young woman who's named after Pablo Neruda, the Chilean poet.
Uh-huh.
And she's named Neftali, and Neftali is one of Pablo Neruda's names.
Okay.
Uh, and I just thought, who is this person? What kind of person would name their kid Neftali after Pablo Neruda? Uh, and also, like, these ideas, like, there's a town called Three Rivers that is between here and the border in Austin that I traveled through many times in the 20 years that I've lived in Austin. So Three Rivers, I was always like, okay, whenever we think about rivers, we usually think about them in the singular. We think about this one river, all right? So two rivers, okay, we can compare two rivers, all right? But Three Rivers, I was like, what is that? To me, that's like, I don't know, another other like, what is this? You know? So between all these ingredients and me like going through these things and also these 19th century narratives, I had this idea of kind of like Wizard of Oz kind of narrative in that first act of the book, the first book. Just almost like a Wizard of Oz kind of thing of the characters moving from point A to point B, and you're meeting characters along the way.
Yeah.
So I guess that I guess like an eso. I know it's kind of a jumble and kind of esoteric maybe, but like that's why I trusted it and that's why I kept going. I guess. You know?
So those kind of 3 points of like the character Neftali sort of came to you with that name, the town Three Rivers, and then
Yeah, and also this idea of a band breaking up in the future. So I knew that it was gonna be a breakup story, but a band breakup story.
okay.
You know, and I was interested in that and what happens to these people with creative drives who can no longer do that because of their realities changing, you know? So
Yeah.
that's like something that is maybe like hidden under there.
Okay. All right.
I
I
hope.
feel like that gives. I just had the thought. I mean, maybe it all organically happened, but like, did you go with 3 books and because of the Three Rivers name?
Oh wow, wow, that's fun. You know, I never even thought of that.
I hadn't thought of it till just now.
That's what I'm saying too about me learning things and these
Yeah. Well, it's a fun connection. You should go with it. That's like that was in there.
super interesting.
Okay, so you said you work on a typewriter.
Yeah, I can show it to you. I think.
Oh yeah, sure.
Let me see. Let me see what I can do.
Oh yeah, and then Jasmine Monel, whom not only me but other people keep trying to say Janelle Monet.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
All right. Oliver is from 1962.
Wow, vintage.
So I've written already. I've written already three. Actually, all my books have been written on this machine. So, yeah, I've had this machine for 15 years now, and I've written everything on it. I drafted everything on it, and I've only changed the ink ribbon 3 or 4 times.
Wow.
So I'm so grateful to have it. I'm so grateful to have it.
Yeah. So how the overall question, I guess, can you tell us a little about your writing process? I mean, it does obviously the typewriter must play into that somewhat, just in terms of the physicality of it, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I'm sorry. Can you rephrase the question? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Can you tell us a little about your writing process? Like when you were writing the book, are you
When I was writing the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, beyond that, I don't know. Like, for me, it was always just trying to connect with what I was trying to do, which to me, every one of my books is written in this way. I feel in many ways that I'm mostly collaborating with either like these images or these characters or these settings or all of them together and seeing how I can tell their story in the best way that I could. And because it is me who is the author, it comes out a certain way, I suppose, you know? So I don't, I, most of my, I always think that, okay, I always think that writing is like almost like, for the lack of a better description at the moment right now, like the violence in those old westerns, like the old like Italian, what we call spaghetti westerns. There's a lot of staring. There's staring. There's music, staring. You're like, my God, when are these people gonna stop staring?
Yeah.
And then the violence part happens super, super quickly. After all this staring. And to me, that's what writing is. You think about it a lot. There's music. There's staring. And then when it finally comes together, you sit down and you write it, and it all just happens, and it all just
Okay.
happens, you know. But because I wrote this book in a certain way, like that first section of the book, I had a rule that I could only write like this much every time I sat down and write, and I really worked myself up to write this much in a page. So after like 2 years, I'm done with that first section, you know.
Yeah.
Writing only this much, you know,
Yeah.
because I was in no hurry to write another book at the time, you know, to
Okay.
finish another book, right? You know.
Sure. Sure.
So after like 5 or 6 years, I already had those first two sections, you know. So and then the last section, it took me the shortest time to write. I wrote it like in 6 or 7 months. That part 3 of the book. But that middle part took me 2.5 years to write. It was the longest. It took me a long time, and I listened to nothing but the work of Clara Schumann. It's in the acknowledgments of the book,
Oh,
actually.
okay.
I listened to nothing but the works of Clara Schumann as played by this pianist named Helena Boschi, and it's in the acknowledgments there.
Okay.
Beautiful, beautiful. Oh my God, I can hear it right now if I close my eyes. So that really took me there every time. So anyway, that's it. That's
So
my.
you did like lean into music a lot when you were doing your
I'm
drafting.
sorry. Can
You
you
leaned
repeat that?
in, you leaned into like music a lot when you were in the
I
midst.
had to sometimes, especially that middle part, and especially Jack Clara Schumann. Just listen to it over and over. It just really took me to that story. I was like, to me, I was like, it was the story was finding me, and I was like, I have to write this in a way that I could because I almost felt that I wasn't capable of writing it, you know.
Yeah.
But I felt like I really needed to. I really just had to just collaborate with it. Otherwise, I was just gonna. My fear was that I was gonna keep writing the story for the rest of my life unless I finished it, you know. So I
Right.
had to do it. Even and if I failed, it was gonna be this glorious failure. But I just had to do it, you know.
Yeah. So, and someone asked because you brought out your typewriter, and then they mentioned, Jasmine Manel in the book. She also writes on a typewriter. I mean, was that? Did you want to infuse yourself into the book that way, or you just felt like that was right for the character?
No, 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 not really. You know, I've seen a lot of typewriters, and I can visualize different kinds of typewriters, and I've seen different kinds of people with typewriters, even if they're inoperable. So I'm like, a typewriter for a certain kind of person. I can visualize a typewriter for a certain kind of person. So to me, it's like a character kind of thing. It's like I can visualize what kind of typewriter it is, even if I couldn't name what kind, what brand it is, or what it is. I could see what kind it would be. So that's what I was interested in more than anything, and also the portability. I feel that when you write with a typewriter, it's almost like a community kind of thing. Almost the community is kind of involved in a way in your writing process, because everybody can hear it. Everybody has to put up with it.
Oh yeah, the sound of the keys.
Yeah, and more importantly, like you're accountable to it. Like if you say, "Oh, I'm gonna go write," and then nobody can hear the typewriter, you know, then they're like, "What the hell are they doing in there? He's not writing. You guys have been writing." So you're kind of held accountable to the sound, you know.
Okay, that's awesome. I've never thought about. I've never written on a typewriter, so I will have to try it.
I recommend it. I recommend it. You know.
Yeah, good. Okay, so you mentioned that you started this like 10 years ago, but a lot of what is in there, I mean, it comes off as like it could be today, tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I also read, in some of your other interviews that you said you don't really write to specific politics or a specific like message, but it's clearly in the book that with the like strength of the book bannings and things like that. Why do you think it developed in that way? How do you?
You know what? I'm not sure. I think maybe wanting to be part of the tradition of literature does that. I felt that that kind of landscape hadn't really been covered in
Yeah.
here where I'm from, like Texas. We think about Texas literature, the Southwest or the border, or Mexican American literature or whatever. Don't really think about these kind of fantastical, kind of unclassifiable kind of narratives. They're usually kind of stark, kind of realist narratives, or like Western or
Yeah.
derivatives of that kind of Western, like noir kind of stuff.
Hmm.
So I wanted to kind of uh, branch out from these conventions or traditions and try to explore the themes of these lands of this area in a new way with different kinds of literary traditions. And that's what excited me. I think this is the land a lot of people don't know, but like the writer Robert E. Howard, who's famous for writing like Conan the Barbarian and Call the Conqueror and all these other things. He's from Texas. So like he never really left Texas ever his whole life. So like to me, I think about those landscapes that he saw. He saw these fantastical things, and I'm trying to see these same kind of things, but in a different kind of way with a different kind of literary traditions. And that's what excited me, and and as far as everything else, I wish I could give you an answer to it. I wish I could take credit for it in many ways. I know that I wrote it, but I wish I could take credit and be like, oh yeah, I deliberately did that because of A or B or C. And sometimes I think that if you're just open to ideas, if you don't think to yourself, I am this kind of writer and only this kind of writer, and leave yourself more open to being like, well, what kind of writer am I? How can I collaborate more with the existing tropes around me that are not being explored in books and literature? Because that's what I ask myself all the time as a writer. I'm like, how can I tell the story that only I can? But only I can. Because, yeah, I'm an immigrant. I was born in Mexico and things like that. I was raised in a trailer and things like that. But perhaps reading my books, you can't really see these things. You won't be able to see these things. And for me, I'm like, why would I tell those stories, my story, in that way? Somebody's gonna write that story. Don't get me wrong; those stories are powerful and important. But I know that somebody else can tell it in a better way than I could. So because I am inclined to these almost unclassifiable books as a reader, m- I'm inclined maybe to pursue those kinds of narratives as a writer too. But also, I love like a good adventure story. I'm a sucker for, I'm a sucker for not be. I don't believe in being weird for the sake of being weird. I'm never doing that. It's always for the sake. It's always in service of the human emotion at the core. Whatever the human emotion is, that's my job as a writer to find it. And whether you write a book that takes place in outer space or in the bottom of the earth or in present day Dallas, you're still trying to access human emotion.
Yeah. That's such a good point. I mean, I think that a lot of people connected with several of the characters. Did you like Neftali? I think one of my questions to you earlier was about the female relationships in the book and how those came to be kind of the predominant storyline. But I guess also one of the questions we had from the book club members was, did any of the characters, were they influenced by sort of like the stereotypes you see today? I think specifically they were thinking of Alexi and like whether he's influenced by like a certain type of male stereotype that we have today, from like in terms of
Yeah, I see what you're trying to say. I see what
yeah.
you're trying to say. Sometimes I am like, oh, I don't know, like, some, I do interrogate my choices sometimes, but but I'm like, why did I do that? And I'm like, I don't know. And I wish I could say why I did that. I do think about those kinds of questions. But to me, I guess think it's just what I observe with my male friends. Like I said, like the type of person who had creative drives who can no longer do that, and how they're now exercising those creativities that they can no longer, they still have to do it in some kind of way, even if they're like manipulative, even if they're controlling, even if they're not aware of it, they're still playing some of this game, these mind games that are important, I guess, to youth culture, maybe sometimes, or maybe just culture in general. So I was interested in just exploring these things. I never really had an agenda, like
Mhm.
saying to myself, "Oh, I'm gonna explore like toxic masculinity through this character." Like to me, it was just, it wasn't really like that. If it, I am able to see it now and be like, "Yeah, that is there, and that is definitely there, and that can be definitely interpreted in that way and be seen." And sometimes it's just straightforward too. But it was never my intention. To me, it's just like, what is the story that is unfolding? How best can I represent it, being the writer that I am? And to me, accessing those things was difficult enough. So I didn't, it was difficult enough. So if I were to interrogate this greater theory and greater like things, I think I would have just fallen apart mentally and I wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah.
So I have to kind of get away from those things when I'm writing it. So those kinds of terms I think are useful for like now for discussing it.
Mhm.
But for me, like writing it at the time, I don't think those terms are useful for the writing. I think maybe like later in discussing it, they're more useful, you know?
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying. Because like if you write to a certain message or a certain like politic,
Yeah.
come off as like didactic or like you're trying to show something very and if I it makes sense. You how it develops just by observation. I see what you're saying.
Yeah. And I feel that about every heavy theme in this book, about every like thing that could be interpreted as like a heavy kind of thing, feeling, political or whatever. Like I feel that I took that same approach with it all. Like it was just like, it's sure it's all there, it's all intertwined, but I never spent too long in one thing. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's it.
No, that's good. I think that's a very reasonable answer. It definitely makes a lot of sense. Um, we okay, so these might have a similar frame, but we we had one book club member who was really intrigued by the fact that some characters were named very specifically, like Neftali, for example, and others were very intentionally like not named. Or
Yeah,
there's in the story within the story or the story about Jasmine Monel, the characters, her lover and her brother, their names aren't the same. They're like fake
yeah,
names.
yeah.
And was that something like you were trying to explore that came out in the story, or
You know, I wanted to tell like a very, you know what? This is funny, okay? At least to me, okay? I've never read Proust, the writer Proust, all right? But I
okay,
feel that but I've read so much about it, and I've read so much about Proust and his work and all the themes and all the dark things in there that I was like, I want to tell like a weird kind of sabotagey kind of lying kind of love story that is like almost like Proustian without me ever having read Proust, but
okay,
having read so much about Proust. So I kind of, and also I read one time uh, an interview with Colson Whitehead, with the great writer Colson Whitehead, where he said that to him, the most difficult kind of book to write is a love story, you know?
okay,
And I had to agree with him. I was like thinking about all the kinds of books. I'm like, it's so difficult to pull off a successful kind of love story without delving into like cliches or romance or like, like tearing at your heartstrings kind of thing, you know. So I was like, I is that true? I was like, I want to be able to believe that that is not true. And also like at that time, where she came from, where that character came from, is that I kept coming up with ideas for stories that I couldn't write. For example, the book Brother Bronte, like that came from that came from that idea of that book, and I was like, I can I am not the person to write this book. I cannot write this book. If I was a 25-year-old woman who feared nothing, I could write this book.
Okay.
But I can't write this. I'm not this person. So eventually, when I had like 2 or 3 ideas for these books, so I was like, who is this person? Who is
Yeah.
writing these books? Somebody is writing these books, all right?
Okay. Yeah.
So, and it took me a while to figure out about this character. I was like, but I knew that when I started writing this book, when I still had that beginning and I was going off, I knew I was comforted with one thing, is that I knew that the title of the book was going to be the title of the fake book within the book. So I knew, narratively speaking, that I was going to have to get there. I was going to have to explain what that was. And then eventually I was like, okay, I'm going to have to explain who this author is. And in doing that, hopefully it will give me a chance to explore the backstory of this world, even if it's just peripherally in this world. It kind I liked approaching it at a skid rather than directly, the entire narrative. So yeah, so that's what was attractive to me about it. And the names, I don't know, the names, they just come naturally to me sometimes.
Mhm.
I wish I could tell you something deeper about it and how I was more careful about it. But to me, I was like a few days ago, somebody in one of these interviews pointed out how Proserpina is like the goddess of the underworld.
Oh, that's good.
And I was like, okay. And he also pointed out also that she kind of comes back from the dead too in the narrative.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I didn't think about any of these things, and I did not do it on purpose. So, but whenever I hear something like that, I end up being like, okay, it kind of like validates why I did it. I was like, okay, that's why that's why that happened, because of these reasons that even if I'm unaware of, I'm like, okay, becoming aware of them, I'm like, I end up trusting it more, trusting that I trusted what the book was trying to tell me that it was.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, okay. I mean, very intuitive. It sounds like the whole writing process of this book, and very much like letting the characters speak for themselves, which is great because I don't know. I think one of the things that I read about, or like to help me come up with questions with this for this book, was about like how the narrative, Brother Bronte, the book within the book, is women's voices being stolen. So the idea that like these female characters are speaking, on their own terms, and you're still uncovering it even as you're like reevaluating it years later is really interesting. I think that's really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we've covered like a lot of grounds, like a lot of the questions I don't feel like I need to restate because you've kind of answered them, but there is one that I want to make sure I get in here, which is
Yeah, it's too.
In terms of the imagery, did you, for the volcano eruption, was that something that was like you had an idea of like what you wanted it to look like and you needed a thing to explain it, or did it work the other direction where like you thought of the volcano?
Like around 2019, I thought that what was going to happen in the book, that there was going to be this pandemic in it.
If there was a pandemic.
So then when it actually happened, I was like, I can't do that anymore.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah.
So, but at the time, I got to say that it was for the best, because all my life, I've always been super obsessed with not only Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, but around the time that Mary Shelley was writing Frankenstein, this volcano in Indonesia had erupted that had blocked out kind of parts of the sun in different ways all over Europe, that kind of affected not only the kind of literature that came out of that era, but also the kind of visual art that came out of the era, the painting, what the skies did in that era. And I was kind of always obsessed with that idea, and so because of all these 19th century tropes that are in the book, like to me, I had all these 19th century things in the book. For example, I had an industrialist who also owns who is also the mayor of a small town, which is like a Thomas Hardy kind of thing,
Mhm.
like the mayor of Casterbridge kind of thing. I had a tale of two cities kind of narrative with George West and Three Rivers. I had a long lost twin kind of narrative,
Yep.
like the Prince and the Pauper kind of thing. I had the I had the tiger, which is like a William Blake kind of image to me,
Mhm.
or even like a Rudyard Kipling kind of thing. And another thing, and this other thing about the volcano erupting was just another 19th century kind of thing, because I saw also that the 19th century kind of politics was also like a big influence on the book. Like the mayor, Pablo Henry Crick, is loosely based on Henry Clay Frick,
Oh,
who worked for Andrew Carnegie way back in the day.
okay.
And I was really interested in the history of the Homestead Strikers and all that 19th century kind of politics kind of stuff. So this infusion of 19th century politics and literature and wanting to put it all together in the small town on the border was really interesting to me, and was always there in me trying to figure out all these things about the character in the world. So
That's so interesting. 'Cause, you're that you drew from the 19th century, and yet, I mean, I think every description of the book I've read, and it was my immediate thought was like that Henry Crick seemed very much like Elon Musk, and so like this
yeah,
reflection of the past into the present and future is
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. If you read a lot, the more I read about the 19th century and the politics, and also the preoccupations that authors of that era had, and the tropes, the narrative tropes in their work, the more I saw like parallels in this day and age, and I was interested in collaborating with these parallels and with those traditions in a new way. In a new way, you know.
Yeah, that's really cool. Um, we did actually have a question of like where the tiger, like why the tiger, but I guess the why the tiger is it fits
That is
in.
why the tiger. That is why.
Okay.
And also this. All right. I grew up in the border, very very close to the Mexican border. All right.
Uh-huh.
And growing up, there was always a rumor. All right. I grew up very rurally. All right, in a trailer. All right. There was always a rumor that somebody had smuggled a baby lion from the border, and that they had it like in a cage, and that one day the lion just got loose, and that there's been all these like dead like cows and stuff around. So every once in a while, when I'd go out in the dark or something, I'd get scared that the lion or the tiger or whatever was gonna attack me in the middle of the night. So out of that boyhood fear, also that I never forgot, and also all these other tropes, I was like, I'm finally gonna put the tiger in Texas. And
Nice.
also every once in a while, you hear about somebody who did the exact same thing, who has pretty much like an illegal zoo on their property and has all these exotic animals. And I was thinking about just these animals. What will happen if one of them goes loose like this? So that's how I kind of dealt with it.
Very nice. Well, did anyone have any final follow-ups or anything that I needed to get in real quick before my last question?
No, it's been great.
No, good. Okay. So the last question I asked you in advance was, can you tell us what you've read lately that you would recommend? And I know I did read that as a bookseller, you don't love to give people your personal recommendation because you want to recommend what they are interested in. But now we're really asking. We want to
Yeah.
know.
Okay. You know. Yeah, I have like a kind of like a roundabout, like a nonfiction recommendation. All
Oh,
right.
great. Yeah.
That I've been reading, and it's about the 20th century novel, and it's by Edwin Frank, A-N-K, and it's called Stranger Than Fiction.
Stranger
the
Than
name of the
Fiction.
book. Stranger Than Fiction. It just came out like in November. And
Okay,
it's just
yeah.
about every essay in there is about a different book, and he establishes connections with other books from all over the world. So like, you're interested in like literature and the connections to the 20th century novel from all over, and I highly recommend it. It's very insightful. Even if you've never read the books, it's very illuminating and it's very insightful. And I had a blast reading it, I gotta
Okay.
say.
Great. Stranger Than Fiction. Everyone take note. Add it to your nonfiction list.
By Edwin Frank, yeah.
Frank. Oh, I did just remember. Sorry, I don't know. Maybe you're. This is less of a question, like a real question, but like one table did mention that in all of the reviews they had read, that Proserpina's name has been misspelled, and we were.
Oh wow!
Had that ever been brought to your
You
attention?
know what? It's a strange name. People have a hard time saying it too, and I get it. And
Is
I
it
think that's what-
Proserpina?
Proserpina, yeah, Proserpina. You're saying it right. You're saying it
Okay.
right. Yeah. You know, it's Persephone. It's the same word for the same name of Persephone. You know. So that is interesting. I'm super dyslexic, so I had to stare at something forever to know.
To see.
If it's
Yeah, they said it was being what would you say it was? Prosperina. It was apparently being.
Oh, that's hilarious! That's hilarious.
It's
That's
different
funny.
though. Prosperina versus.
I'm gonna pay attention to it now.
Yeah. So if you need to get the word out, apparently Amazon's the big.
Yeah, it's not common. These names aren't common, and that's not
No,
why
they're
I
really
chose them. But I'm grateful that they're circulating again. These names.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we are so glad that you joined us tonight. I feel like we've all learned even more than what we went into it, from our discussion. And yeah, we're just so grateful that you took the time to think through our questions and come and join us tonight. And I will send you a picture of the food. Did I forget anything? No. Yeah.
Thank y'all so much for having
I'll
me.
show you everybody out here real quick.
Yeah, please let me see everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're this way. Maybe you can kind of.
Yay! Wow, everyone is up. I hope everyone had a good time. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks. Yay! Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad you guys do this. All right, enjoy your
Yeah.
lovely dinner. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Having me. Good night.
And all you have to do is exit out. There's not like a real exit button. You just close the screen.
It's okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You are so good at keeping a